Hi, everyone. It's a ticket to Christ, and we're talking about grieving, dealing with loss. And we're looking at Joseph because Joseph's type of grief came from his own family members. So the trauma of his pain, of his grief, came because of how he was treated by those who were closest to him. And of course, Joseph, if you read the story of Joseph, it starts in Genesis 37. He had these dreams that really showed that he would, in the long term, lead his family, be the one who would have dominion over them. And so it made his own brothers envy him because of what that dream foretold. And so we're picking up in verse 18 when Joseph was sent to go search for his brothers, and they saw him one day and they had an opportunity. It says, and when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said to one another, behold, this dreamer cometh. So come therefore, and let us slay him, cast him into some pit, and we will say some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands, to deliver him to his father again. And it came to pass when Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him, and they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it, and they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead, with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. Then there passed by Midianites merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and was sold and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. And Reuben returned unto the pit and said, behold, Joseph was not in the pit. And Reuben returned unto the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit. And he rent his clothes. And he returned unto the brethren and said, the child is not, and I, whither shall I go? And they took Joseph's coat and killed a kid of the goats and dipped the coat in blood. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father. Sorry, I'm going to pause there from reading because I'm being choppy here, but you can read the whole thing on your own. The rest of the story, the account is that, they pretended that somehow a wild beast had devoured Joseph. Meanwhile, these Midianites sold Joseph to the Egyptians, and I guess to Potiphar. While Joseph was there, Joseph did such an amazing job. Potiphar put him in charge of his house, and Potiphar's wife was a promiscuous woman, a wicked woman, and tried to sexually assaulted Joseph, and he ran for his life, and she lied against him and said that he tried to rape her. And so Joseph was thrown into a prison, into a dungeon. That's the type of prison they had. And I believe he stayed there for like 12 years before the Lord delivered him and brought him over as ruler through another dream that he was able to interpret for the Egyptian Pharaoh. And he eventually became a ruler of Egypt, second only to the Pharaoh, and the rest is history. So, but the account that what I want us to focus in on is grief when it comes from trauma. The trauma that comes from when people closest to you, either they're being hurt or they're hurting you. So for instance, if you have an elderly mother who is suffering from, say, dementia, and she's being taken care of by family members, but they're not treating her well, they're not treating her kindly, and you're in a situation where you're powerless to immediately help, you have to wait. That can put you in a state of trauma and a state of grief, because you're not sure that, that your loved one is getting the care, and maybe you're not in a position to immediately go and help. That can be traumatic. Or if you're in a situation like Joseph, whereby you're betrayed by family from those who were your brethren, that could put you in a state of grief and a state of trauma. Notice he was sold to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites, if you remember, Ishmael was Abraham's first son. Abraham had Ishmael with Hagar, right? And the Midianites came from one of Abraham's other sons. After Sarah died, Abraham had, I think, about 5 or 6 sons with his would have been I think she was referred to as his concubine Keturah, but she would have been probably a wife, and one of the sons was called Midian. So it's from that son that this happened. And so how did Joseph cope with his grief? What I see when I read the account, and you can read this account if your grief is, along those lines, for example, if you look at Genesis 39, it says, and Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian, right? So it's very strange that in verse 3 it says, and his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. So how would he see that? How would he have been able to see that God was with this man? I think that because he could see this man praying to God, he could see this man honoring God in his life, even in the midst of his challenge, because he wouldn't have noticed that God was with him if God didn't have something to do with Joseph's life and his reaction. And of course, God's hand was in him. Not in him. God's hand was on him, probably on him in the sense of his blessing, God had a purpose for Joseph. And so even in this whole thing happening, God was going to use it for his good. It's not that God wanted him to go into slavery and all these things, but God was going to use it as a training ground for him to come into a bigger purpose, a bigger program, something that would save many lives generationally. It would save all of his brothers' lives, but also it will build Joseph's character and strengthen him, right? And teach him and train him little by little, so that when he got to the position he was going to be in, he would be able to master it. So first he would start with this household, right? Learning how to do things there diligently under Potiphar. And then his character would be tested with this woman. And as he's thrown into jail, I think it kind of protected him from that society, from intermingling too much with that society, kind of kept him protected from their godless ways. And he was able to continue to foster probably a close relationship with God. So what I see is God's hand continually being on him, and God being with him. And these challenging things that happened were not things that broke him. They were things that built him. And it must have caused him a lot of grief, though. It must have been a lot of tears, a lot of challenging, times, fear. Obviously, he was young. I think he was 17 at the time, and so probably had a lot more resilience than maybe an older person. Because at that age, you still don't know what you don't know, and there's also still that's the idealism of it. So he was at an age, I think, whereby he could be molded, and the challenging things of life, he could still have, just a good attitude, or good is not the right word, but a hopeful attitude about it. Whereas maybe somebody who was older and jaded might have buckled, So those are my insights on this. Joseph is a good one to read. Start from Genesis 37 and read all the way through to the end of Genesis. It shows you how the Israelites got into Egypt in the first place. And, there's a good ending in the sense the brothers saw that they were wrong. And Joseph was able to be instrumental in a powerful way of protecting them, protecting the family. And in essence, helping to be one of the foundational people to help build that nation that God was going to use to bring Jesus forth, right? So, beloved, that is it from me with this one. It was a little choppy to get to, but I hope when you study it out for yourself, it blesses you or helps you in some small way. Have a great day.